Just a couple of days ago, we did a video discussing the character of Cien Granz, a character exclusive to the light novel Spirits Are Forever With You, and a clone of the 8th Espada Szayelaporro, so make sure to check that video out if you haven't done already. For today, we're going to be filling in the rest of those story gaps by looking at another character absolutely central to the story of Spirits Are Forever With You, which is Roka Paramia, a mysterious Arrancar whose face is mostly obscured by a mask in the shape of a huge skull, and someone who's the absolute key to the events unfolding in this novel. I'm very conflicted about the character of Roka. In many ways, she embodies what I don't really like about some of these light novels, in that they have a tendency to take the most random of background characters and turn them into these key figures in the world of Bleach, when really, reasonably, they don't have any right to be in that position, and Roka is absolutely one of those characters. Don't recognise her? Well, that's because the last time we saw this character in the official canon story, she was getting her head crushed by Yami after healing his arm, and that's literally it. She appears for maybe 3 panels, and then was spun off into this major character in the light novel. It's kind of like me saying that the Hollow that was serving Baragon wine in his flashback actually turns out to be one of the most powerful Vasto Lords in the entire series. Although, now that I mention it, she does look awfully human. And yet, at the same time, there's no denying that Roka Paramia is a pretty compelling character, and I actually like what they did with this woman. And I also think that her Resurrection is one of the best looking in the entire series. As far as I'm concerned, you cannot fault that design. It looks absolutely sublime. So really, Roka is a tale of 2 halves for me, and it's going to be really interesting diving into this character the further we go. Now, within the light novel, Roka is depicted as a surprisingly tragic character, somebody who has basically lived a life of abuse at the hands of her master, really the only person she has ever known, the person who brought her into being and gave her reason for existence, and that person is the former 8th Espada Szayelaporro Granz, who at the time was a Vasto Lord under the employ of Baragon and then later Aizen, and at this time he was also the 0 Espada, so he was considerably more powerful and dangerous than he would become when we actually meet him in Bleach itself. For over 200 years, Roka Paramia endures unspeakable torture and experimentation at the hands of Szayelaporro himself. Despite being one of his fraction, he simply uses her as a tool to further his own academic ends. He chops her into little pieces over and over again, resurrecting her, stitching her back together, only finally administering anesthetic when he himself grows tired of listening to her scream. It's honestly pretty dark, and a really eye-opening look at how some of the Espada may have actually treated their fraction. It does seem like within the story itself that Aizen gives them total authority to really do whatever they like with these people, and some of them have a slightly more friendly relationship. It always seemed like Grimmjow got on pretty well with his gang, even if they were slightly rough and ready, and of course Stark and Lilinet effectively need one another, and I always found Neutra and Tesla's relationship to be a really interesting one as well, because Tesla kind of sees them as friends, and Neutra never wants to admit it, but he genuinely cares for him as well. And Szayelaporro always had really fascinating fraction in that he effectively just manufactured them all, this small army of them, to serve his every need, and that's exactly what Roka does as well. But it is really sad and heartbreaking to see a character that has such intelligence of her own being reduced to this, to even come to her name. Szayelaporro simply looks at a pile of rocks in the distance and he says, you know, once you've fulfilled your use to me, you'll be as important as those Roka over there, Spanish for rocks, and he gives her that name. That's literally all she is to him, a dull, lifeless thing that's barely worth any recognition. Now, Szayelaporro created her by intertwining countless souls, almost like forcing them together in an effort to create an artificial Menos Grande. And so he builds what she effectively is to begin with, which is this white, spider-like Adhuchus class Hollow. And I've got to be honest, I'm kind of surprised, thinking back when I was reading up about this character and going through Spirits Are Forever With You again, it just made me think that I'm surprised Kubo never did a spider-style Arrancar in the series itself. Seems to make perfect sense, but, you know, when you look at Roka's Resurrection, I'm glad that they waited until now because they did land on something really cool. But by this point in her life, she is totally mentally broken, as you might understand, and she has just readily accepted her existence as just being something for Xyloporo to do with as he wishes. As explained in Spirits Are Forever With You, the two major plot lines that are running in this light novel coexist and they intersect at multiple points, one of them being of course the story of the 7th and 8th Kenpachis, and the other one being this story of CN Grands and Roka Paramia, and they actually intersect very early on in the timeline, 250 years before the present day. Kurayashiki is battling a bunch of hollows when suddenly a Garganta opens up next to him and this strange thread comes out of it and wraps itself around Kurayashiki's blade, but he's not having any of it and he hoists whatever is doing that out of the Garganta, and he reveals this small white spider hollow. And after this, Xyloporo observes the battle between Kurayashiki and Azashiro, which would help form the basis for what would become Roka's most powerful and crucial technique that she would ever have. Xyloporo turns to Roka at this point and he says that he was planning on killing her, but after her work here and after seeing what they have seen, he thinks there is more use for her, so he'll allow her to continue to be his fraction, something that she is extremely pleased about because obviously she doesn't know any different. Something weird about this moment, timeline-wise, is that Xyloporo mentions Yami here, and I was under the impression, I think, that Yami probably came around considerably later than this for some reason, because Xyloporo is apparently a Vasto Lord at this point, he's apparently the Zero Espada, so maybe Yami is nowhere near this strong yet, or maybe Yami gets to this point a little bit later after Xyloporo has reverted back to his much weaker form. It's kind of hard to say, and it's interesting to wonder when they all met up, when Yami actually joined the Espada, because it feels like he's been there longer than I'd expected. But like I said, Xyloporo witnessed the battle between Azashiro and Kurayashiki, and if you remember from our video on those two Kenpachi, you'll know that Azashiro has the ability to fuse with basically everything around him, to fuse his own body with the very air, with materials, with other people, and control them in that way. And it's from witnessing that ability that Xyloporo develops Roka's key power known as backup, basically creating these threads of Negacion that allow him to store information and spread it out across a domain. Now, this is a little bit strange, certainly not something I would have ever envisioned Negacion being used in this way, but if you remember rightly, Negacion is this hollow ability which basically allows them to summon a literal pocket dimension in the form generally of a beam of light of some description, which cannot be breached from the outside. And they generally use this power to save their comrades, to help them retreat, as we see at the end of the Soul Society arc, or in the case of Grimmjow, he uses that power to imprison Ulquiorra somewhere that he won't be able to escape from. So what's going on here is you have this spider-like hollow, so it makes a lot of sense thematically. She's always weaving these huge webs, and she can send out these threads of Negacion that cannot be penetrated, and use them to basically draw in information and store that information in her own pocket dimensions. It's mentioned in the book that it's like a backup hard drive of sorts, and that makes a lot of sense. Roka can send her threads out across Hueco Mundo, for instance, send them into the very rocks, into the very trees of Hueco Mundo, and turn them into these strange backup drives. But we'll get more into the power of backup a little bit later on, because it really is vital to understanding this character. Despite having created this remarkable power, and even going so far as to pour his own memories into Roka's backup ability so that they can be hidden away and stored for future use, Xyloporo eventually grows bored of her because he eventually masters the ability Gabriel, which is what he was after in order to become, as he calls it, a perfect being. But Xyloporo doesn't kill her. Instead, he simply sends her away and says, you know, you can go and be a nurse, you can go and work with other Espada, and this would lead to Roka's ultimate demise at the hands of Yami after she reattaches his arm, and to test it out, he crushes her head, hoping to split her in two. And while that small moment might be the extent of Roka's involvement in the canon manga itself, she slowly rebuilds. She draws from all of the threads that she has laid out across Hueco Mundo, and very, very slowly, very gradually, her body rebuilds itself, restructures itself. She weaves herself a new body out of her spider web. Much in the same way as Xyloporo had, Roka had stored numerous duplicate versions of herself and her own memories within these backups, within the very foundations of Hueco Mundo herself. So effectively, after one body is destroyed, irreparably, she can bring one of those backups forward as you would in real life on a computer and reinstate that as her normal self. Honestly, it's pretty broken to me, but I kind of appreciate that it was effectively an artificially created ability by Xyloporo himself. Otherwise, I think this would be really teetering on something absolutely insane. I mean, it already is. But then again, you know, it does make a lot of sense. Xyloporo was chasing this idea of immortality, and this certainly seems like a perfectly good way of being immortal. It's like having countless extra lives, were you in a video game, to continue to salvage from after you're killed. But like I said, it took a very long time for Roka's body to fix itself, and by the time she finally came to again, she learned that Aizen had been defeated and her master Xyloporo had long since been killed. But there is one crucial fact. We mentioned in the last video that Xyloporo at his most powerful state created a clone. That wasn't entirely accurate because we weren't quite ready to talk about Roka yet, but what he actually did in that state was pour his own memories into Roka's threads and scatter them across Hueco Mundo, presumably for a time in the future where he felt he might need them. And Roka, as she was rebuilding herself from all of her backup duplicates, unknowingly also rebuilt a persona of her master Xyloporo from all of the memories he had sent out across Hueco Mundo as part of her web-like network. And so before we move on to how Roka is really involved in this story, because like I said in the last video, I still want to do a proper overview of Spirits Are Forever With You's plot, where we'll really dive into all of this. I just want to talk a bit more about this backup ability. I think thematically it works really, really well, and it's honestly kind of cool that with a spider-style holo, a spider-style Arrancar, they kind of went with both the slightly more literal and slightly more figurative version of a web, the slightly more cybernetic idea of a web as well, that Roka has this constant network of information that she's always keeping and can access like a hard drive from a computer. I think that is honestly really cool and actually pretty inspired. A part of me does just kind of wish they had created a brand new character rather than making it the random holo that was killed by Yami, but at the end of the day, that's a small nitpick. It doesn't really matter all that much. I'm also not entirely sure what the logistics are of her sending threads wherever she likes, because that ability is quite literally like a beam of a separate pocket dimension. So the fact that Roka has almost total control over this power seems to be really quite something. That's really quite impressive. And I also wonder as well, I'm presuming it's very literal when they say that they're storing data inside these threads. It's because these tiny, tiny little threads act as almost like fiber optic wire, again going back to that idea of the internet and a network. But Roka is quite literally stuffing them full of information because they are pocket dimensions. Her Resurrection is telaraña, or spider web, quite literally, and like I said at the start of this video, she just looks incredible. I think it is so well designed. It's not over-designed in any way, it really gets across that spidery theme. She kind of reminds me a bit of, and I wonder if she is inspired somewhat by the yokai, the folklore tale of Jorogumo, basically a massive kind of monstrous spider that takes the form of like this beautiful lady to lure people in. I do wonder if maybe she's slightly inspired by that as well. But the special ability of this telaraña is pretty simple. It basically allows her to copy any ability that she has gained data on in the past. And we see throughout the novel that Roka is able to copy and utilize numerous different abilities, including Gemelos Sonido and Cero Doble, and of course the most controversial of all, even Ichigo's ultimate attack, his MUGETSU. There is a drawback to this, a fairly standard one. I would argue that the more powerful the attack that she tries to use, the more likely she is to rupture and damage and irreparably destroy her own body. And there's also the downside as well, that in a lot of cases she can't quite use the abilities as well or efficiently as their original owner. This kind of power I always find to be a little uninspired. It's not quite so bad where Roka is concerned, but it is kind of weird that Naruto would use basically the exact same ability later on for Tokinada's Enra Kyoten, the ability to basically detail, capture, and reuse abilities at will, but not quite as powerful as the original owner. It's virtually the same, and that's a little bit of a shame, but I mean, Roka technically kind of did it first, and I kind of prefer the way hers is implemented, because like I said, the whole spider theme works really well. And you can even see in her special move on Bleach Brave Souls that the massive spider legs on her Resurrection are kind of weaving this image of Ichigo to use Mugetsu, which I think is a really good idea. But looking at Roka's role in Spirits Are Forever With You, she starts out as something of a media sensation because she keeps appearing and reappearing in the human world and being seen by regular humans, not just spiritually aware ones like Keigo and Mizuiro. And that's because she is connected to the human world by these threads of hers, and so normal people can sort of see her as well, and see her vanishing on the spot, which creates kind of this media uproar. And the story kind of ends up with everybody searching for Roka, because she's seen by Don Kanoji, who wants to kind of figure out who this woman is and if he can help her out. She's seen by these strange childlike hollows called Picaro, who also want to capture her. She's of course wanted to be captured by CN Grands and by Azashiro Kenpachi, so really everybody is converging to try and get this one woman. And of course the antagonists of the novel want her for nefarious deeds. Azashiro wants her power so that he can fuse limitlessly with the world around him and reach everyone to enact his ultimate plan. And of course CN Grands wants to destroy her power so it can never be used against him, so she can't manufacture more versions of CN after realizing that she was the one who created him, this lesser tool of his. He doesn't want to be turned into just CN 1 or 2 or 3 of numerous versions of himself, so he wants to destroy her as well. And so yeah, you do get the impression that she is this really kind of lonely, lonesome character wandering on her own in this world where there's really nowhere for her to go because somebody is always seeking her out. And it's her relationship, surprisingly, with Don Kanoji that interested me the most, and I thought it was actually really well handled. Don Kanoji has kind of fulfilled this extremely strange pocket of existence in Bleach of being this street-level hero, particularly where anime filler is concerned, creating the Karakura gang, for instance. But I really do appreciate the kind of more grounded take of Kanoji in this story, the fact that it really actually gives him a chance to do something meaningful and to really help out a vulnerable character. But there's also a really good scene that we talked about briefly in the last video where Mayuri Kurotsuchi confronts CN and basically calls him out for exactly what he is, saying that he is nothing more than a lump of reishi intangibly held together by memories, essentially. He is nothing but a computer virus within Roka Paramia's network. And I thought that was a really cool description of this character, and Mayuri just effortlessly severs CN from all of Roka's threads, which begins to cause CN to break down. At the same time, Roka feels very lost without Xyloporo around to kind of tell her what to do and give her a reason for being, but she slowly begins to find that reason for living in Don Kanoji, and like I said, their blossoming relationship, their blossoming partnership is a really nice story beat that I never expected to come out of this story. I really like how it's handled. Don Kanoji kind of, in his extremely flamboyant and theatrical way, reaches out his hand to her, both literally and figuratively, to bring her back from the brink, essentially, and show her that life is meant to be fun, it's meant to be lived. And it's just really cool, because he says that he sees this lonely look in her eyes, and he wants to kind of show her what life is. He buys her these lovely new clothes, takes her for a ride in his car, lets her eat ice cream for the first time and really experience these lovely sensations. She doesn't even know how to describe it properly, and he teaches her that, you know, ice cream should be tasty, it should be tasty, it's not just fun. And it's really nice because it feels surprisingly heavy, a lot of the stuff involving Roka. Like, she really feels like an abuse victim or something like that. Someone who has managed to escape the clutches of her former master, but still desperately feels like she needs him to be around her at all times. But at the same time, she's so close to finally escaping his clutches, and she's starting to realize that she has worth too, outside of Xyloporo's needs. And there's another wonderful scene as well, a little bit further in the past, where Roka was again quite close to escaping Xyloporo's clutches, where she meets Neliel, and Neliel kind of wants to take her under her wing as another of her fraction and give her a chance at having a decent life, but Xyloporo, you know, brings her away again, and even though Neliel tries to banish him, because at this point he's not an Espada, of course, later on Neliel would be injured and turn into a child and tossed out of Las Noches, and Roka overheard Neliel wanting to bring her into the fold, and so is, you know, understandably pretty upset by this and reasonably suspects Xyloporo as having something to do with Neliel's exile. But just these small character moments with Roka and Don Kannoji are really something special. Again, going back to that idea of her eating food, Xyloporo used to force feed her reishi essentially, and then she grew to just starting to absorb reishi almost passively through her threads, so she's never had any inclination to want to eat anything in her life, and so finally getting to do so of her own free will is a real big moment for her. And I think crucially, Roka herself, in her own mind, realizes that for the first time in her life, she's being treated as an ordinary woman rather than a tool. I really like the action sequence at the end of this novel involving Roka because it's really unorthodox and not at all what you'd expect from this series and totally wacky, but basically Roka is using her powers to weave this road for Don Kannoji's car to just race along. Uryu's kind of in the backseat blasting arrows. It's weird, and I'd love to see it actually turned into something visual for us to really get a chance to look at it. And eventually they go and save the Piccolo children from Cien after he's kind of become this enraged eldritch monstrosity and is fighting Kenpachi Zoraki. And it's just a wonderful moment, and there's also a great moment prior to that as well, where Roka kind of asks Uryu Ishida to kill her because she knows that she's the hollow that these villains are all after, and if she's gotten rid of, then she won't be able to be a problem anymore. But Uryu doesn't want to do that, and Don Kannoji, you know, is adamant that they shouldn't do that, and they should work together because they can be heroes, and heroes don't run. And it's just really surprisingly well handled, the whole thing. And then, of course, eventually, after this car chase, once they've got Cien's attention, Roka escapes into Hueco Mundo, leaving her friends behind and luring Cien to his eventual defeat. But when facing off against Cien Grands on the sands of Hueco Mundo, Roka creates a Zanpakuto toe for herself, turning the mask on her head into strands, which she then uses to weave herself a blade, which is honestly, again, a really cool idea. Again, logistically, I do wonder how this actually works, but it doesn't really matter. Again, like I said, her resurrection just looks so good, and she begins to fight Cien using those different abilities I mentioned before, Gemelos Sonido, Trepadora, Cero Doble, which is honestly, again, could be quite a cool spectacle to witness, these two hollows kind of going all out and all of this different flurry of abilities being utilised. But Roka is being injured by using each of these attacks and decides that she needs to use something that can end the fight, and Cien believes that she wants to utilise a power that was left over by Ichigo and Ulquiorra during their epic fight, so he blows up the dome that they were having the battle on. But unfortunately for him, he is wrong about his assumption. He captures Roka in his grasp, but she reveals that she had wandered through Karakura town for a very long time, and by doing so, she had acquired perhaps the most ultimate power she possibly could, that same power that Ichigo used to once defeat Aizen. And so, as we see in Brave Souls, she begins to create this vision of Ichigo before using Mugetsu on Cien himself, completely almost obliterating him with that immense shroud of darkness. And in doing so, it almost obliterates her own body as well. But she's able to pull herself back together again after coming to and stagger through the Garganta back towards where Don Kannoji is. But when she returns to Don Kannoji, Azushiro is still around and he pins her to the wall, you know, near death himself because of the exertion he has had against the battle with Zaraki, and he needs to take her power now. But again, you get the culmination of her and Don Kannoji's really fantastic relationship where Kannoji actually stands up to Azushiro and even takes several daggers into the shoulder, into the leg, into the chest, but he doesn't give up and he buys enough time for other people to arrive and foil Azushiro's plan. And later on, Roka returns to Hueco Mundo, where Harabel tasks her with looking after the children Picaro and being the one to kind of watch over them. Now that she really does have her own free will, she can choose to do whatever she wants, and it seems like Roka's going to become a pretty important part of the new leadership of Hueco in making it a better place for everyone. She even reaches out to CN Grands after he is incredibly damaged and again very near death and trying to attack Don Konoji, but she reaches out to him and he agrees to merge once again with her network, and his body just kind of crumbles away until there's almost nothing left, but what is left at the very end is nurtured by Roka's threads until eventually CN, all that's left of him is this young Arrancar boy who wants to fulfill his promise of fighting Zaraki Kenpachi again one day, as Roka is kind of watching over him. So in many ways their roles have, at the very end there, finally been reversed. Roka is the one in total control, and she has a reason for living. It is to look after the vulnerable of Hueco and help Hueco become a much better place in the future as well. And I think the end of her story is lovely and heartfelt as well, and a wonderful capstone to her development and her relationship with Don Konoji. At one point he kind of wonders if she's alright and if she's going to return to see him or not when the Picaro return, but he doesn't see her, but instead he senses one of her threads wrapping itself around his finger, and he hears a voice on the wind saying that spirits will always be with you. And that's just a wonderful way to end the novel. Don Konoji realizing, finally sensing that maybe this woman is actually happy now at last, and it's just a great way to end this character's tenure. And that really is about it for Roka Paramia. There are, of course, details that we have missed in both this video and CN Grands' video that I want to cover, like I said, in a dedicated video to Spirits Are Forever With You. But there is some really nice character work here with Roka, even though, like I said, I have my gripes with the way the light novel handles some of these characters. Some of them have just abilities that are so broken and so ridiculous that it feels like it veers onto almost fan fiction level territory, but actually a lot of what we do get is really well handled and presents us with some great character moments. And I do think that her powers and abilities are really kind of cool as well and well implemented. And just on the whole, I think she's a neat character, and it would be cool to see more from her maybe at some point in the future. But that's it for the video, guys. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of the character of Roka Paramia and her abilities of backup, of controlling the Negacion? What do you think about all of that, her spider-like imagery? I'd love to hear your comments down below. Please do let me know. Don't forget, guys, to give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and also hit subscribe for more Bleach content like this every single week. Check out my second channel, Mr. Tomo Talks Games, if you're into gaming at all. Full video essays and all of that sort of thing over there. And of course, a massive thank you goes out to everybody who is supporting me on Patreon. I really do appreciate each and every one of you, so thank you all so much for that. But until next time, guys, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.